I stood in the shadowed hallway, gripping a tray of fresh gingerbread, when I heard my mother say the words that finally broke me. She declared that Christmas Eve was the perfect time to pretend to honor me before humiliating me in front of the entire congregation. But they did not realize the daughter they planned to destroy was now a ruthlessly efficient corporate fixer. That night would be the last time they ever dared to try and manipulate me. My name is Ray Collins, and at 32 years old, I was standing in the kitchen of my childhood home in Harborview, Tennessee, holding a piping bag of royal icing like it was a loaded weapon. The air in the house was thick with the scent of cinnamon, molasses, and the underlying musty dampness that always clung to the walls of this old Victorian rental. I had paid the rent on this place for the last 6 years, just as I had paid for the ingredients currently spread across the granite countertops, and just as I had paid for the brand new tablet sitting wrapped in silver paper in the trunk of my car. I was the invisible engine that kept the Collins family running. Yet here I was, relegated to the role of the help, while my mother and sister held court in the living room. I wiped a smudge of flour from my cheek and sighed, the sound lost in the hum of the refrigerator. I needed to get the gingerbread men finished before the service tonight. Tonight was the Christmas Eve gathering at the Graceway Community Church, an event my mother had been hyping up for weeks as a special night of gratitude. I spotted my mother's phone sitting on the edge of the kitchen island, dangerously close to a cooling rack of cookies. The screen was lit up, the call timer ticking upward. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up, intending to walk it out to her in the living room. I assumed she had forgotten to hang up on a friend. That was when I heard the voice on the other end. It was muffled, likely on speakerphone in another room, or perhaps a three-way call, but I recognized the nasal, self-satisfied drawl immediately. It was Troy, my brother-in-law. I froze in the darkened hallway that separated the kitchen from the living area. The floorboards here were warped, and I knew exactly where to stand to avoid the creak that would give me away. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my heart hammering a sudden, violent rhythm against my ribs. Troy was speaking, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "It is all set up with the guys," Troy said. "As soon as the video montage ends, I will step up. We hit her with the mismanagement angle. I will say the family fund is drained because she has been skimming off the top to fund that fancy city lifestyle she hides from everyone." I felt the blood drain from my face. The family fund. The account I replenished monthly to ensure my mother had heating oil and Sienna had gas for her car. Then came my mother's voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the static. "We have to be careful. Troy, we cannot make it look like an attack. It has to look like an intervention, a desperate plea from a loving family." Right, Troy laughed, a sound that made my stomach turn. "Tough love. The congregation eats that stuff up. Once we publicly shame her for abandoning her duties, she will have to sign over control of her accounts to prove she is repentant. We will lock her into that financial commitment for the next decade." I stood there, a statue in the shadows, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. This was not just gossip. This was a coup. What about my part? This was Sienna, my younger sister. Her voice was pitched into that fragile, wavering register she used whenever she wanted something. I practiced the crying. Do you think I should hold my stomach when I do it? Like the stress is hurting the baby? My breath hitched. Sienna was not pregnant. I knew this for a fact because I paid her health insurance premiums and saw the statements. I had just seen a routine checkup bill 2 weeks ago that confirmed a negative test she had taken for fatigue. "Yes, definitely hold the stomach," my mother instructed, sounding like a director on a movie set. "When you start crying about how Ray's selfishness is endangering the future grandchild, the ladies in the front row will lose their minds. Pastor Coleman is already primed. I told him Ray has been struggling with greed and worldly distractions. He thinks tonight is a prayer circle to bring a prodigal daughter back to the fold. He is going to call her up to the altar and ask the whole church to lay hands on her." I lowered the phone slowly, my hand trembling. The Ray Appreciation Night. That was what they had called it on the invitation. They had told me it was a surprise party to thank me for everything I had done since Dad died. They had lured me back from the city, asked me to bake the cookies. asked me to bring a nice gift for the raffle, all to orchestrate a public execution of my character. They wanted to trap me. They wanted to use the social pressure of the church, the only community that mattered in this small town, to blackmail me into signing over legal control of my finances. They were going to paint me as a thief and a villain in front of the people I had grown up with, using a fake pregnancy and lies about a fund that only existed because of my paycheck. I stared at the wallpaper in the hallway, a peeling floral pattern I had stared at 1,000 times as a child. But the Ray who used to cower in this hallway was gone. They thought they were dealing with the quiet, doormat daughter who worked a vague office job in the city. They thought I was a mid-level manager pushing papers. They had no idea. They did not know that for the last 5 years, I had been the lead crisis manager for Northline Recovery Group. My job was not pushing papers. My job was walking into multi-million-dollar corporations that were bleeding out, identifying the toxic assets, and cutting them loose with surgical precision. I had faced down boardrooms of hostile shareholders. I had fired corrupt CEOs while they screamed threats in my face. I had uncovered embezzlement schemes that made Troy's little plan look like a game of Monopoly. I was a shark in a tank of goldfish, and they had just made the mistake of trying to bite me. A cold, familiar sensation washed over me. It was the same feeling I got right before I walked into a negotiation room. The shaking in my hands stopped. The rapid thumping of my heart slowed to a steady, rhythmic beat. My vision cleared, sharpening until every detail in the hallway stood out in high relief. The hurt, the agonizing, crushing pain of hearing my own mother plot my destruction was still there. But I took it and shoved it into a steel box in the back of my mind. I locked it away. There would be time to grieve the family I never really had later. Right now, I had a job to do. I looked down at the phone. The call was still active. I could hear them laughing now, congratulating themselves on their brilliance. "Tonight is going to be perfect," Sienna giggled. "Finally, she will have to pay up without looking down her nose at us." "Put the phone back," I whispered to myself. I moved silently back into the kitchen. I placed the phone exactly where I had found it, next to the cooling rack. I picked up the piping bag again. My movements were fluid, mechanical. I squeezed a perfect line of white icing onto a gingerbread man's chest, creating 3 precise buttons. "Ray?" I turned. Sienna was standing in the doorway. She was wearing a soft, oversized sweater that bunched around her midsection, creating the illusion of a bump where there was none. She offered me a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mom was looking for her phone," Sienna said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness I had tolerated for 3 decades. "Have you seen it?" "It is right here," I said. My voice was steady, calm, flat. "I think she left it when she went to check on the roast." Sienna walked over, swiping the phone. She glanced at me, searching for a crack in the armor. But I gave her nothing. I focused on the cookies. "You are coming to the church early, right?" Sienna asked, leaning against the counter and picking up a cookie I had just finished. She bit the head off without asking. "We want everything to be perfect for your big night. It is all about you, you know." "I know," I said, meeting her gaze. "I would not miss it for the world." "Great," she chewed, crumbs falling onto the clean floor I had just swept. "Troy and I are going to head over to set up the audio-visual stuff. Just bring the big box when you come, okay? Mom is really excited about the raffle gift." "The gift," I repeated. I looked over Sienna's shoulder, through the window, to where my car was parked in the driveway. In the trunk sat the 64-gigabyte tablet they wanted me to donate to the church raffle, a bribe to buy their affection. "Do not worry, Sienna," I said, and a small, razor-thin smile touched my lips. "I will bring the gift. In fact, I think I need to make a few adjustments to it. I want to make sure it is exactly what this family deserves." Sienna blinked, looking confused for a fraction of a second, but her arrogance quickly smoothed over any doubt. "Whatever, just do not be late. 7 o'clock sharp." She turned and bounced out of the room, yelling for Troy. I stood alone in the kitchen. The silence settled back around me, but it felt different now. It was no longer the silence of servitude. It was the silence of the calm before the storm. I set down the icing bag. I untied my apron and folded it neatly on the counter. I was done baking. I was done paying. And I was certainly done being the victim. They wanted a show? They wanted a night the congregation would never forget? I would give them one. I walked to the sink and washed the flour from my hands, scrubbing until my skin was pink and raw. I looked at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. The woman staring back at me did not look like the daughter of Harborview anymore. She looked like the senior vice president of Northline Recovery Group. 7 o'clock, I said to the empty room. I had 4 hours. 4 hours to dismantle a lifetime of lies. 4 hours to gather the evidence I needed. 4 hours to turn their appreciation night into the most efficient hostile takeover this town had ever seen. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the back door, leaving the gingerbread men unfinished on the counter. They would not be needing sweets where they were going. As I drove away from the house, the tires of my sedan crunching over the gravel and onto the paved road, the silence of the car felt heavy. It was not the peaceful silence of solitude. It was the suffocating silence of a library where you are afraid to breathe too loud. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, but my mind was not on the road ahead. It was traveling backward, rewinding through 16 years of receipts, invoices, and emotional blackmail. The phone call I had just overheard was not a sudden aberration. It was not a momentary lapse in judgment from a loving family. It was the inevitable crescendo of a symphony they had been composing since I was a teenager. I remembered being 16 years old. Most kids that age were saving up for their first car or spending their allowance on movie tickets and fast food. I was standing at the counter of the utility company downtown, counting out crumpled bills from my tips as a waitress to keep the lights on. My mother had sat at the kitchen table that morning, weeping into her hands, saying she just did not understand where the money went. She was too delicate for math, too fragile for the harsh realities of the economy. So I became the man of the house, the accountant, and the savior before I even had a driver's license. That was the script. We all had our roles, casting shadows that stretched long over our lives. Mom was the eternal victim, a woman constantly battered by a world she refused to navigate. Her weapon was her helplessness. She wielded her incompetence like a sword, cutting through my boundaries by simply collapsing until I had no choice but to catch her. Sienna was the princess. She was 5 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she was treated as though she were made of spun glass. If Sienna wanted something, she needed it. If she did not get it, she suffered, and her suffering was a tragedy the whole house had to mobilize to prevent. And then there was Troy. He came later, but he fit into the dynamic like a missing puzzle piece. He was the dreamer, the man with a million ideas but zero work ethic. He was a parasite who had found a willing host in a family that already operated on a currency of delusion. They looked at me and saw a resource, a utility, to them. I was Ray the reliable, Ray the boring, Ray the ATM machine. They thought I worked some mid-level administrative job in the city, pushing papers for a salary that was just enough to cover their mistakes but not enough to command their respect. They believed I lived in a cramped apartment, eating instant noodles so I could send checks back home. If only they knew. I merged onto the highway, the city skyline rising in the distance, gray and steel against the winter sky. The truth was, I had not been a paper pusher for a very long time. I was a fixer. At Northline Recovery Group, I was the person they called when a company was bleeding out. I walked into boardrooms filled with screaming shareholders and terrified executives, and I made the hard calls. I cut the rot. I restructured debts totaling in the hundreds of millions. My bonuses alone were more than the cumulative income of everyone in that house back in Harborview. I did not live in a cramped apartment. I lived in the skylight residences, in a penthouse that overlooked the river. It was a space of stark, minimalist beauty. White marble, polished concrete, and floor-to-ceiling glass. I kept it empty, almost sterile, because I was terrified that if I filled it with anything personal, anything soft, my family would find a way to seep in and ruin it. I kept my life compartmentalized. 2 phones, 2 wardrobes, 2 versions of Ray. I did it to protect myself, but also to protect them from their own greed. I knew that if they knew the true extent of my wealth, the requests for hundreds would turn into demands for thousands. The guilt trips would escalate from medical bills to investment capital. But hiding the money had not stopped the bleeding. It just changed the nature of the wound. My mind drifted to my college graduation. That was supposed to be my day. I had worked 3 jobs to put myself through business school without asking my mother for a dime. I had graduated summa cum laude. I threw a small party at a local park, inviting a few friends and professors. Halfway through the event, my mother had stood up to give a toast. My chest had swelled with a rare hope that she would say she was proud. Instead, she broke down in tears, telling the gathered crowd of strangers about how hard it was to be a widow, how the bank was threatening to take the house, and how she did not know how she would pay for the food we were eating. It was a performance, a masterclass. My friends, uncomfortable and pitying, had passed a hat around. They collected $300. My mother took the cash with trembling hands, whispering blessings, while I stood there burning with a shame so hot I felt like my skin was peeling off. The party ended an hour later. No one remembered my honors. They only remembered the poor, destitute widow and her selfish daughter who threw a party while her mother suffered. I paid off the credit card bill for that party the next day. The bank was never threatening the house. She used the donation money to buy a new television. Then there was the incident with Sienna's car. We were in the church lobby on a Sunday morning. Sienna had been complaining about walking to her community college classes, saying the bus gave her migraines. Suddenly, right as the service let out, she collapsed. It was a theatrical faint, the kind you see in bad soap operas. My mother screamed. Troy, who was just her boyfriend then, shouted for help. They made a scene that stopped traffic. When she came to, she wept about exhaustion, about the stress of the commute, about how her body just could not take the strain anymore. In the chaos, with the deacons watching and the church ladies whispering, my mother grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my flesh. She hissed that if I had any decency, if I loved my sister at all, I would co-sign the loan for a reliable vehicle. She said God was watching me. She said I was killing my sister with my stinginess. I signed the papers that afternoon. Sienna drove that car for 6 months before she dropped out of college. She traded it in for a sportier model 2 years later, rolling the negative equity into a new loan that was still under my name. I was still paying for a car that no longer existed. For years, I told myself I was helping. I told myself that once I got them stable, once I fixed just one more crisis, I could walk away. I told myself that family is family, and you do not abandon people who need you. But as I drove toward the city, the cold reality settled in my gut. I was not helping them. I was enabling a parasite. I was the host, and they were feeding on me, growing stronger and more audacious with every check I wrote. The phone call I heard today was not a new development. It was just the next logical step. They had realized that private guilt trips were yielding diminishing returns, so they were taking the show to a bigger stage. They were going to weaponize the community. They were going to use the church, the one place where reputation still meant everything in that small town, to force me into a legal bind. The fake pregnancy, the public prayer, the allegations of financial mismanagement. It was brilliant, in a sick, twisted way. It was a corporate hostile takeover strategy applied to a family dynamic. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away aggressively. I mourned for the little girl I used to be. The one who just wanted her mom to bake cookies with her instead of asking for rent money. I mourned for the 16-year-old who missed prom because she had to pick up an extra shift to pay for Sienna's braces. I mourned for the woman who had built an empire of success in the city, but still felt like a scared child whenever she walked through the front door of that house in Harborview. But the mourning period was over. This Christmas was not going to be about revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. Revenge is throwing a drink in someone's face or slashing tires. I was not interested in revenge. I was interested in a correction. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to audit the Collins family. I was going to expose the hidden liabilities, reveal the fraudulent transactions, and liquidate the toxic assets. I saw the exit for the city approaching, the tall glass spire of the Aurora Tower, where Northline Recovery Group occupied the top 5 floors, gleamed in the afternoon sun. It looked like a sword piercing the sky. I was not going back to my penthouse to hide. I was going to my office. I needed access to my secure servers. I needed my forensic accounting software. I needed the full weight of my professional resources. They wanted to put me on a stage? They wanted to make everything public? Fine. I would give them the transparency they claimed to want. But transparency is a double-edged sword. It clears the air, but it also leaves you with nowhere to hide. I signaled and took the exit ramp, the engine purring as I accelerated. The sadness in my chest was hardening into something cold and solid, like diamond. I was done being the daughter. Tonight, I was the auditor, and the audit was going to be total. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Aurora Tower was smooth and silent, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise currently playing out in my head. When the doors slid open, the lobby of Northline Recovery Group was bathed in the dim blue standby lights of a holiday weekend. The security guard, a stoic man named Marcus, who had seen me work through 3 consecutive Thanksgiving holidays, simply nodded and buzzed me through without a question. He knew the look on my face. It was the look that meant someone was about to lose their company, or in this case, their livelihood. I walked straight to my corner office, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished concrete floors. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The glow of the city below and the massive monitors on my desk provided enough illumination. I threw my coat onto the leather sofa and sat down in my ergonomic chair, the mesh backing conforming to my spine like armor. I woke up my terminal. It hummed to life, 3 screens flickering on in unison. It was time to go to work. For years, I had kept my family's finances separate from my professional tools, handling their bills through personal banking apps on my phone like a dutiful daughter. But today, I treated the Collins family estate, if one could call a rental house and a pile of debts an estate, as a hostile entity under forensic audit. I initiated a deep dive algorithm I usually reserved for detecting embezzlement in mid-cap tech firms. I inputted my mother's social security number, Sienna's details, and Troy's information, authorizing the search through the power of attorney documents my mother had signed 5 years ago when she claimed she was too overwhelmed to talk to the IRS. She had forgotten she signed them. I had not. The data began to populate the screens in cascading waterfalls of red and black. The first thing I pulled up was the deed to the house on Maple Street. For decades, my mother had wept about the mortgage, about the crushing weight of owning a home she could barely afford. I had paid the property taxes. I had paid for the roof repairs. I assumed, based on her constant wailing, that she held the title but was drowning in the payments. I stared at the document on the center screen, and my breath hitched. The house was not in my mother's name. It was held in a revocable living trust established by my grandmother, Evelyn, 20 years ago. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, skipping over the boilerplate text to find the beneficiary clauses. My grandmother, a woman I remembered as stern but fair, had evidently seen through my mother's helpless act long before I was born. The clause was clear. The house was to be held in trust for the benefit of my mother during her lifetime, provided she maintained financial solvency. If she fell into arrears or demonstrated gross fiscal irresponsibility, the trusteeship would bypass her immediately. I scrolled down to the successor trustee line. It was me. I sat back, stunned. My mother did not own the house. She was essentially a tenant of the trust, and I was the dormant landlord. She had hidden this document, likely burying it in the attic, terrified that if I knew I had legal authority over the property, I would stop enabling her bad habits. She had been billing me for mortgage payments that were actually just maintenance fees for a trust she was violating every single day. I shifted my focus to the transaction history, the anger in my gut turning into a cold, hard resolve. I pulled up the shared checking account I funded every month. I began to categorize the expenses, dragging and dropping line items into a visualization software that projected onto the glass wall separating my office from the conference room. Troy, there were dozens of withdrawals at a grocery mart in a neighboring county. I cross-referenced the merchant ID. It was not a grocery store. It was an ATM located inside a Greyhound racing track. $300 here, $500 there. The timestamps correlated perfectly with the days he claimed to be out job hunting. He was not buying food for the family. He was gambling away the heating allowance. Sienna. I filtered by her debit card. She had claimed last month that she needed $400 for emergency dental work. I found the transaction. It was not a dentist. It was a high-end beauty supply store in the mall, followed immediately by a purchase at a luxury lingerie boutique. She had spent my money on silk and contour kits while telling me she was in physical pain. And Mom? Her transactions were the most insidious. I saw transfers of large sums, thousands of dollars over the last year, going to an account I did not recognize. I ran a trace on the routing number. It led back to a collection agency for a credit card she had sworn she closed 10 years ago. She was not just bad with money. She was actively paying off secret debts with the charity I gave her, all while crying about how she could not afford to buy a turkey for Christmas. I stood up and walked to the glass wall. I uncapped a red marker. I began to draw lines connecting the data points. The visualization looked like a disease map. The money flowed from my account at the top, trickled down into the family fund, and then hemorrhaged out into gambling, vanity, and secret debts. It was a perfect ecosystem of parasitism. They were not just ungrateful, they were embezzlers. I could have just stopped paying. I could have changed my number, moved to a new city, and let them drown in the mess they created. That would have been the healthy, therapeutic choice. But then I remembered the conversation in the hallway. I remembered the gleeful malice in Troy's voice as he planned to humiliate me. I remembered my mother coaching Sienna on how to fake a pregnancy to extort me. They wanted a show. They wanted to drag me into the light. If I walked away now, they would spin the narrative. They would tell the church I abandoned them. They would play the victims, and the community would believe them because the lie is always more entertaining than the truth. No, I would not leave in silence. I was going to burn their narrative to the ground, and I was going to use their own stage to do it. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Ava Mercer. Ava was the best corporate attorney in the state, a woman who ate non-compete clauses for breakfast. It was Christmas Eve, but I knew she would answer. People like us did not take holidays. We took opportunities. Ray? Ava's voice was crisp, cutting through the silence. This better be good. I am halfway through a glass of vintage red. It is better than good, I said, my eyes fixed on the trust document on my screen. I need you to look at a trust deed from 1995, the Evelyn Collins estate, and I need you to tell me how quickly I can activate the successor trustee clause based on evidence of fraud. I heard the sound of a glass being set down and the clicking of a keyboard. Ava was already logging in. Send me the file, she commanded. I forwarded the document. A minute of silence passed, heavy and thick. Ray, Ava said, her tone shifting from annoyed to intrigued. This is ironclad. If you can prove your mother has mishandled the assets, the house is yours. Not in a month. Immediately. The clause is self-executing upon proof of insolvency. I have the proof, I said, looking at the red lines on my glass wall. But there is more. She has a mortgage on it, or she claims she does. Checking, Ava muttered. Okay, interesting. There is a lien against the property, but it is not a traditional mortgage. It is a home equity line of credit she took out 5 years ago. And guess what? It is in default. The bank has packaged it into a distressed asset bundle. They are looking to offload it before the fiscal year ends next week. My mind raced. Distressed asset bundles were my playground. Can I buy the note? I asked. You want to buy your mother's debt? I want to become the bank, I corrected her. If I buy the note, I hold the lien. I control the foreclosure process. I can have the paperwork drafted in an hour, Ava said, her voice dropping into a professional purr. I know the asset manager at that bank. He owes me a favor. We can purchase the debt for 60 cents on the dollar. By tonight, you will not just be the trustee, you will be the primary creditor. Do it, I said. And Ava, I need you to be at the Graceway Community Church at 7 o'clock. Bring the paperwork. I love a Christmas miracle, she said dryly. I will be there. I hung up and dialed the second number. Nico. Nico was a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud. He was expensive, discreet, and frighteningly efficient. Collins, he answered on the first ring. I have a name, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Troy Miller, my brother-in-law. He is running some kind of investment scheme. He calls it a fund, but he is spending the principal at a dog track. I need everything. I need to know who else he has taken money from. I need to know if he is soliciting funds across state lines. Troy Miller, Nico repeated, the sound of typing in the background. Give me 20 minutes. If he is running a Ponzi, even a small one, there will be a paper trail. These idiots always leave digital footprints. He is planning to solicit investments from a church congregation tonight, I added. That makes it wire fraud and potentially charity fraud, Nico said. I will pull his records. If he has a history, I will find it. I stood before the glass wall, the red marker still in my hand. The diagram of their deception was complete. I had the trust. I was buying the debt. I was exposing the theft. I took a photo of the invitation to the Ray Appreciation Night, the one with the cheesy font and the clip art of praying hands. I opened a group chat with Ava and Nico. I attached the photo. Underneath, I typed a single line. This is the stage. I need the truth to step into the spotlight at exactly 7:15. I put the phone down and looked out at the city. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the skyline. The countdown had begun. They wanted a savior? I would save them from their own lies, even if it destroyed them. Back in the silence of my office on the 42nd floor, I did not just have spreadsheets open. I had become an omniscient observer of my own life's demolition. While my right-hand monitor displayed the foreclosure documents I was currently finalizing with the bank, my left-hand monitor was streaming a live feed from 3 different sources: the security camera I had installed in the living room of the rental house 2 years ago for safety, Sienna's public Instagram live feed, and a FaceTime call Troy had foolishly routed through the household Wi-Fi, which I paid for and administered. It was a masterclass in absurdity. It was a black comedy so dark that if I had pitched it as a screenplay, producers would have told me the villains were too caricatured to be believable. But there they were, in high definition, preparing for my destruction with the giddy excitement of children on Christmas morning. On the Instagram feed, Sienna was sitting at the kitchen island, my kitchen island, ringed by a halo light she had bought with my credit card. She had applied makeup to look specifically pale and washed out, highlighting her cheekbones to suggest a fragile, expectant mother under duress. Hey guys, Sienna cooed into her phone, her voice dropping an octave to feign exhaustion. I am just getting things ready for tonight. It is going to be so emotional. We are holding a special intervention service for my sister. Please, just send prayers. She is really lost right now, and the stress, well, the doctor says I need to be careful for the baby, but I have to do this for her. She paused to read a comment, touching a hand to her flat stomach. Aw, thank you. Jessica? Yes, family is everything. We just want her to come home. I watched, stone-faced, as she ended the live stream with a heavy, dramatic sigh. The second the camera cut off, her posture snapped back to normal. She grabbed a piece of the gingerbread I had baked earlier and shoved it into her mouth, chewing with her mouth open. Did you get the filters right? Troy asked, walking into the frame of the security camera. He was wearing a tie I had bought him for job interviews he never went to. You need to look sympathetic, not ugly. I look tragic but beautiful, Sienna snapped, wiping crumbs from her lip. It is called distressed chic. Anyway, the engagement on that stream was huge. People are already asking how they can help. Good, Troy said, leaning over the counter and scrolling through his own phone. Because I got the draft of the confession letter done. Listen to this. I leaned in closer to my monitor, turning up the volume. Troy cleared his throat, adopting a somber, mock-penitent tone. This is what we are going to say she wrote, right? Okay. Dear Mom, Sienna, and Troy, I stand before you broken. I have let the allure of the city and the greed of my career blind me to the needs of the people who made me who I am. I confess that I have hidden assets, lied about my income, and neglected my duties as a daughter and sister. Tonight, I pledge to hand over full stewardship of my accounts to the family council so that I may learn humility again. Troy lowered the paper, grinning like a shark. Boom! We read that while she is sitting in the front row, if she denies it, she looks like a liar in front of God and the Reverend. If she stays silent, she accepts it. It needs more guilt. My mother's voice crackled through the speakers. I shifted my gaze to the third window. My mother was on a video call, propped up against a stack of napkins. She was evidently at the salon, her hair currently wrapped in foils, even while getting a dye job I was undoubtedly paying for. She was micromanaging my crucifixion. Make it sound more pathetic, my mother instructed, her voice tinny through the device. Add a line about how she is jealous of Sienna's happiness and the baby. That will turn the mothers in the congregation against her instantly. Envy is a sin they hate. Got it, Troy said, scribbling on the notepad. Jealousy, good angle. And remember, my mother continued, checking her reflection in the salon mirror, the ceremony needs to be a mix of celebration and heartbreak. It has to be fun, but painful. Pain is what opens wallets. If people feel sorry for me, the poor widow with the ungrateful, rich daughter, they will donate to the Family Stabilization Fund we are announcing. I sat back in my chair, a dry laugh escaping my throat. It was clinical. They were dissecting my character to maximize revenue. Speaking of wallets, Troy said, puffing out his chest, I talked to my buddy Rick, the one who runs that Harborview Whispers Facebook page. He is locked and loaded. The second the service starts, he is going to post an anonymous tip about Ray being investigated for corporate malfeasance at her job. It is total lies, obviously, but by the time she disproves it, her reputation in town will be mud. She will have nowhere to go but us. Smart, Sienna said, checking her reflection in her phone again. Trapping her here is the only way. If she loses her job, she has to move back into her old room. Then we can watch her bank account like hawks. It was a comprehensive strategy: social isolation, professional sabotage, and public shaming. They had really thought of everything, except, of course, the fact that their target was watching them in real time. Suddenly, Sienna frowned, tapping her phone screen aggressively. What is this? She whined. What? Troy asked, not looking up from his masterpiece of fiction. I just tried to order the catering for the after-party. The expensive sushi platter we wanted. The card declined. My hand hovered over my keyboard. I had initiated a freeze on the authorized user cards exactly 3 minutes ago. Declined? Troy scoffed. Try it again. She probably just forgot to pay the bill. Typical Ray. So irresponsible. I tried it twice, Sienna said, her voice rising in panic. It says, account temporarily suspended. Contact administrator. Troy, I cannot pay for the sushi. What are we going to eat? Calm down, my mother's voice cut in from the salon. Do not panic. It is probably just a fraud alert because you are ordering so much. It happens when you spend a lot of money quickly. She will fix it when she gets here. We will just tell the church that Ray insisted on paying for the food later as part of her penance. Sienna relaxed, the tension leaving her shoulders. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. She is probably just traveling and the bank got suspicious. Exactly, Troy said. She owes us this, and she knows it. She owes us everything. My mother agreed. I spoke to Pastor Coleman this morning. I told him Ray has been having spiritual battles. He is going to call for a special prayer of repentance right after the offering. He is going to ask the whole church to pray for Ray to stop worshiping money and start worshiping family. Sienna looked a little hesitant for the first time. She bit her lip. Mom, is that too much? Like having the pastor call her out by name? It is necessary, Sienna, my mother snapped. Do you want that nursery designed by a professional or not? Do you want a new SUV for the baby or not? Ray has been holding out on us for years. She sits in that city with her fancy job while we struggle. We are just balancing the scales. You are right, Sienna said, her resolve hardening. She does owe us. Troy walked over to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of sparkling cider I had bought for New Year's Eve. He popped the cork, the sound sharp and loud on the audio feed. To tonight, Troy said, pouring the liquid into 3 glasses, one for him, one for Sienna, and holding one up to the phone for my mother. To the last night Ray gets to act superior, to the Ray Appreciation Night, may it be the most profitable night of our lives. To family, Sienna chirped, clinking her glass against his. To justice, my mother added. They drank, smiling the smiles of people who believe they have already won the lottery. I looked down at the image Nico had just sent me from the church. He had snapped a photo of the printed program that was currently being placed on every seat in the sanctuary. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. On the front was a grainy photo of me from high school, looking awkward and young. Inside, listed under the special needs section, was a QR code. I zoomed in on the text beneath the code. In lieu of traditional gifts for Ray, the family humbly requests contributions to the Baby Sienna Future Fund to help alleviate the stress caused by family discord. Scan to give. They were essentially selling shares in a non-existent fetus, using my public shaming as the marketing hook. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't sadness. It was the cold, sterile satisfaction of a coroner determining the cause of death. They were not just bad family members. They were sloppy criminals, and they had just toasted to their own indictment. I picked up my phone and sent a text to the private security firm that monitored the rental property. Disarm the alarm system at 7 p.m. I will be entering with a team. Then I looked back at the screen. Sienna was laughing at something Troy said, wiping a fake tear from her eye. Oh my God, she giggled. Can you imagine her face when the video montage starts? We used that picture of her with braces from the 7th grade. She is going to cry, Troy said smugly, and then she is going to pay. Yes, I whispered to the empty office, closing the laptop lid with a definitive snap. She certainly is. I stood up and walked to the closet where I kept my emergency suit. It was a crisp, white-tailored suit, sharp enough to cut glass. It was the suit I wore when I had to fire a CEO. It was the suit I wore when I had to announce a bankruptcy. It was my executioner's outfit. I checked the time, 5:30. The show was about to begin, and the lead actor needed to make her entrance. I grabbed the thick dossier of evidence from the printer, the pages still warm, and slid them into the leather portfolio. The card decline was just the opening act. The main event was going to be a bloodbath. The printer in the corner of my office hummed with a rhythmic, mechanical efficiency, spitting out page after page of damning evidence. The stack of paper was growing thick, a physical manifestation of the rot that had taken hold of my family. Outside, the city lights of Harborview were beginning to twinkle in the twilight, ignorant of the storm gathering in the tower above them. My secure line flashed. It was Nico. I sent you the file on Troy. Nico's voice came through, devoid of emotion. You are going to want to sit down for this. Ray, your brother-in-law is not just a bad gambler, he is a fugitive. I clicked open the file titled, Subject Miller Troy. A mugshot from 3 years ago filled my screen. It was Troy. Younger, tan, and wearing the same smarmy smile he currently wore in my mother's kitchen. The booking photo was from Sarasota, Florida. He was running a setup called Sunshine Future Investments down there, Nico explained as I scrolled through the police report. Same modus operandi. He targeted retirees, promised them 20% returns on high-yield crypto arbitrage, took their money, and paid out the early investors with the cash from the new ones. It is a classic Ponzi scheme. Ray, small scale, but efficient. He disappeared right before the grand jury convened. There is an active warrant for his arrest in Florida for grand theft and securities fraud. I stared at the screen. Troy wasn't just a leech. He was a criminal on the run. He had come to Tennessee, found my gullible sister and my desperate mother, and decided to set up shop again. "He is doing it here, isn't he?" I asked, my voice cold. I pulled his transaction records from that fund he manages on his laptop. Nico said, "It is messy. He has collected about $15,000 in the last 2 months from local church members. He lists them as angel investors in his spreadsheet, but the money does not go into crypto or stocks. It goes directly into an offshore sports betting account and to pay off the interest on his truck loan." I felt a wave of nausea. $15,000. That was someone's retirement. That was someone's college fund for their grandkids. "Dig deeper," I commanded. "I need to know how much my mother and Sienna know." "Check your email," Nico said. I scraped their group chat history. It is enlightening. I opened the second file. It was a transcript of text messages between Troy and Sienna from 3 days ago. Troy, the old lady in the third pew. "Mrs. Higgins? She is ripe. I told her the fund helps orphans in Brazil. She is bringing a check for $2,000 to the Christmas Eve service." Sienna, "Good job. Babe, make sure she gives it to you before the service starts. We need that cash to put a down payment on the BMW. Being pregnant is exhausting. I need comfortable seats." Troy, "Don't worry. We're going to milk this church crowd dry tonight. Once Ray signs over her accounts, we will have enough capital to really expand. We can hit the Baptist church next." Sienna, LOL, milking the holy cows. I closed my eyes for a second. Milking the holy cows. They were laughing about it. They were predators, circling the very people who had brought them casseroles when my father died. "Nico," I said, opening my eyes, "is the state investigator Lupin secure?" I called in a favor with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Nico replied, "Agent Vance. He specializes in affinity fraud. I sent him the Florida warrant and the current bank logs. He is interested, very interested." "Get him to the church," I said. "Tell him the show starts at 7. I want him there when the collection plate goes around." "He will be in the back row," Nico confirmed. "Ray, be careful. When cornered, rats bite." "I am not cornering them," I said, watching a new document print out. "I am exterminating the infestation." I hung up and dialed Ava. "Status," I said. "The mortgage note is yours," Ava said, her voice triumphant. The bank was thrilled to get it off their books before the fiscal year closed. I wired the funds 10 minutes ago. Technically, as of right now, you are the holder of the debt on the Maple Street property, and since the loan is 6 months in default, I have the right to foreclose, I finished. "You have the right to change the locks tonight if you wanted to," Ava corrected. "But more importantly, I looked at the trust documents again, with the evidence of fraud you just sent me, specifically your mother using trust funds to pay for Troy's gambling. She has violated her fiduciary duty as the primary beneficiary. You can remove her as trustee immediately." "And the legal liability?" I asked. "For the fraud?" Ava paused. "That is the ugly part. Ray, Sienna and your mother aren't just bystanders. Those text messages prove conspiracy. They are active participants in a scheme to defraud the congregation. If Troy goes down, they go down with him. They could be looking at accessory charges, theft by deception, prison time." I looked at the photo of my mother on my desk, a picture from when I was 5. She looked happy then, but looking at it now, I realized she wasn't smiling at me. She was smiling at the new necklace my father had just bought her. "They made their choice," I said. "Prepare the affidavits. I want 3 separate packets, one for the pastor, containing the proof of the Ponzi scheme and the predation on his flock, one for the church board, detailing the misuse of charitable funds, and one for the Harrison family." "The Harrisons?" Ava asked. "The big donors?" "Yes," I said. They gave Sienna $5,000 last week for a nursery renovation for the baby. They need to know there is no baby. I minimized the legal windows and pulled up the portal for the health insurance plan I paid for. I navigated to Sienna's claims history. There it was, a visit to the OB/GYN 2 weeks ago, but the diagnosis code wasn't for pregnancy. It was code ZA01.419, encounter for routine gynecological examination, and in the doctor's notes, which I could access because I was the policyholder and authorized administrator. Patient complains of bloating, pregnancy test negative, advised to reduce sodium intake. Negative. She wasn't pregnant, she was just bloated from eating too much takeout on my dime. I took a screenshot of the medical record, redacting the sensitive personal details but leaving the date, the patient name, and the pregnancy test negative line clearly visible. I printed it. I stood up and walked over to the large conference table where I had laid out my materials. It looked like a war room. I took the sleek, expensive tablet I had originally bought as a peace offering, the gift they demanded. I turned it on and wiped the factory settings. I was not going to give them a tablet to play games on. I was going to give them a viewing device. I sat down at my computer and opened my video editing software. I dragged in the files. Clip 1. The security footage from the hallway I recorded 2 hours ago, with audio boosted. We will humiliate her. Make her sign. Clip 2. The Instagram live of Sienna faking the pregnancy. Clip 3. The text message thread about milking the cows. Clip 4. The Florida mugshot of Troy. Clip 5. The insurance document proving Sienna was not pregnant. Clip 6. The deed to the house, now showing my name as the lien holder. I arranged them on the timeline. I added no music, no dramatic effects, just raw, cold, hard facts, stitched together in chronological order. I exported the file as The Truth, MP4. I loaded the video onto the tablet, then I loaded it onto a USB drive. I looked at the box the tablet had come in. It was wrapped in festive red and green paper with a silver bow. I carefully unsealed one edge, slid the tablet back in, and placed the USB drive right on top of it, taped to the screen with a note that read, "Play me." Then I turned my attention to the envelopes. I took 3 thick cream-colored envelopes, the kind used for formal invitations. On the first, I wrote in elegant calligraphy, Pastor Coleman and the Board of Elders. Inside, I placed the evidence of Troy's gambling with church money and the text messages mocking the congregation. On the second, I wrote, The Harrison family. Inside went the insurance record proving the pregnancy was a lie, and the receipt showing their donation had been transferred to a sports betting site. On the third, I wrote, Mom. Inside this one, I placed a single document, the notice of default and acceleration of debt, along with a copy of the trust amendment removing her as trustee. I added a sticky note to the front. You wanted me to pay for the house. Now I own it. I checked my watch. 6:15. I packed the envelopes into my leather attaché case. I picked up the festive box with the silver bow. It felt heavy, not with weight, but with consequence. My phone buzzed again, a text from my mother. Don't be late. Everyone is asking about you. Wear something modest. We don't want you looking like you think you are better than everyone else. I looked down at my white suit. It was tailored, sharp, and expensive. It screamed power. It screamed competence. It was the complete opposite of modest. I typed back, I'm on my way. And don't worry. Mom, I'm bringing everything you asked for. I walked to the elevator. The office was dark behind me, save for the blinking lights of the server. I had dismantled the company of the Collins family in less than 4 hours. Now, all that was left was the shareholder meeting. As the elevator descended, I caught my reflection in the metal doors. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like the CEO of my own life. I walked out of the Aurora Tower and into the cool night air. The wind bit at my cheeks, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the heat of the bridge I was about to burn, and for the first time in years, the fire felt warm. I got into my car and placed the gift box on the passenger seat. Merry Christmas, I whispered to the box. I started the engine and turned the car toward the church. The drive would take 20 minutes. 20 minutes until the curtain rose. 20 minutes until the Ray Appreciation Night became the Ray Liberation Night. I drove past the familiar landmarks of my childhood. The park where I scraped my knees. The school where I studied until my eyes burned. The diner where I waited tables. I was saying goodbye to all of it. After tonight, this town would never look at me the same way again, and I would never look back. I pulled into the parking lot of Graceway Community Church. It was packed. Cars lined the grass verges. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the warm glow of the sanctuary lights. I parked in the back, next to a nondescript black sedan. The window rolled down, and a man with a grim face and a badge on his belt nodded at me. Agent Vance, Nico had come through. I nodded back. I grabbed the box. I grabbed my attaché case. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and impending justice. I walked toward the double doors of the church. The sound of a hymn drifted out. Silent night. It was about to get very loud. The engine of my car ticked softly as it cooled in the shadowed corner of the church parking lot, a rhythmic counterpoint to the slow, deliberate beating of my heart. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, not yet ready to step out into the winter air. I looked down at my chest, at the sharp lapel of the white suit I had chosen to wear. 2 hours ago, back in the silence of my penthouse before I went to the office, I had stood in my walk-in closet, staring at 2 very different options hanging on the rack. On the left was a soft, oatmeal-colored cashmere sweater and a pair of sensible brown slacks. It was the uniform of Ray the daughter. It was warm, non-threatening, and submissive. It was the kind of outfit that said I was there to help, to serve, to fade into the background while my family took the spotlight. It was the armor of the victim. On the right was the white suit. It was a piece of architectural tailoring I had bought in Milan after closing the hardest deal of my career. It was stark, pristine, and unapologetic. It did not absorb light. It reflected it. It was the uniform of Ray the Fixer. I had reached for the sweater first. Old habits are difficult to kill, and for a split second, the biological imperative to please my mother, to just survive the night without conflict, had nearly won. I had almost convinced myself to play the role one last time, to endure the humiliation in silence and deal with the finances quietly next week. But then the memory of Troy's laugh from the phone call echoed in my mind. We will milk the holy cows. I had dropped the sweater on the floor and put on the suit. Now, sitting in the car, I ran my hands over the smooth fabric of the trousers. This was not just clothing, it was a statement of intent. I was not walking into that church to be the sacrificial lamb. I was walking in as the butcher. I closed my eyes and let the scenarios play out in my mind. I had simulated this evening a dozen times during the drive over, anticipating every variable. Scenario 1. They back down immediately when they see the legal papers. Unlikely. Their greed was too entrenched. Their delusion too absolute. Scenario 2. They try to gaslight me. They would claim the conversation I overheard was a misunderstanding, a joke, a test of my faith. This was highly probable. My mother was a master of rewriting reality in real time. Scenario 3. They attack, they scream, they cry. They paint me as the villain to the crowd before I can get a word out. I breathed in deeply, holding the air in my lungs for a count of 4, then releasing it for 4. I made a pact with myself right then and there. I would not raise my voice. I would not cry. I would not argue. Arguments are for people who need to convince others of the truth. I did not need to convince anyone. I brought the truth with me in a box. I looked over at the passenger seat where the large gift box sat. It was wrapped in heavy, expensive paper that shimmered under the parking lot lights. To anyone else, it looked like a generous offering, an oversized tablet, perhaps, a luxury item. And it was, but it was also a Trojan horse. I reached over and touched the small, silver bell I had tied to the ribbon. It was a tiny thing, a Christmas ornament I had picked up at a gas station on the way. I gave it a gentle flick. Ting! The sound was sharp and clear. That bell was my signal. I had decided that I would not interrupt their little show with words. I would not storm the stage. I would wait until the lies reached their crescendo, until the hypocrisy was so thick it choked the air. And then I would ring this bell. It would be the signal for the end of the world as they knew it. I checked my phone. I scrolled back to the text message I had sent my mother earlier, right before I left the office. I will be there at 6. Her reply was still on the screen, glowing with a toxic warmth. Can't wait to see you. Sweetie, we are all so excited to honor you. Drive safe. I felt a sudden, sharp pang in my chest. It was a physical ache, a remnant of the love I had desperately wanted to be real. For a fleeting second, the doubt crept in. Was I being too harsh? Was I being cruel? They were my flesh and blood. Sienna was my little sister, the girl I used to read bedtime stories to. Mom was the woman who had bandaged my scraped knees. Was I really about to destroy them in front of the entire town? Tss. I looked out the window at the neighborhood surrounding the church. We were on the edge of the historic district, but to get here, I had driven through the streets where we used to live. I had passed the rundown apartment complex where we lived after Dad died. I had passed the grocery store where I used to calculate the sales tax in my head to make sure we had enough pennies to pay for bread. I remembered the weight of that responsibility. I remembered being 16 years old, staring at an eviction notice, terrified and alone, while my mother slept in her room because she just couldn't deal with the stress today. I remembered the fear, the crushing, suffocating fear that we would end up on the street. And then I remembered that while I was carrying that fear, while I was working double shifts and skipping meals, my mother was buying lottery tickets. She was buying premium cable packages we could not afford. She was teaching Sienna that if you cried loud enough, someone else would fix your problems. The doubt evaporated. It was replaced by a cold clarity. I was not destroying them. I was saving the community from them. And in a way, I was saving them from themselves. I was cutting off the supply line that had allowed their toxicity to flourish. I looked to my left. The black sedan was still there. Agent Vance was looking forward, his profile illuminated by the glow of his dashboard. He was ready. The law was ready. I was the only one who had to take the first step. I opened the car door and stepped out. The air was biting. A frigid Tennessee winter night, but the white suit was made of heavy wool and silk. It held the warmth. I smoothed the jacket, buttoning it once at the waist. I checked my reflection in the car window. My hair was pulled back in a severe, tight bun. My makeup was minimal. My eyes were dry. I reached back into the car and lifted the heavy box. I held it with both hands, feeling the weight of the tablet and the documents inside. It felt solid. It felt like justice. The church loomed ahead of me, a large brick building with warm yellow light spilling out of the stained glass. I could hear the murmur of the crowd inside. There were probably 200 people in there. Friends, neighbors, people who had known me since I was a child. People who had been fed a steady diet of lies about me for years. Tonight, they would feast on the truth. I walked across the asphalt, my heels clicking with a distinct, authoritative rhythm. I did not hurry. I did not hesitate. As I reached the wooden double doors, I paused for one last second. I adjusted the box in my arms so that the silver bell was resting near my thumb. Showtime, I thought. I pushed the doors open with my shoulder and stepped out of the cold darkness and into the golden, suffocating warmth of the sanctuary. The moment the heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, the cold silence of the parking lot was replaced by the suffocating warmth of Graceway Hall. The air was thick with the scent of pine wreaths, cheap perfume, and the overwhelming aroma of the expensive catering I had unknowingly funded. I stood at the back of the sanctuary for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the golden light. The space had been transformed. Tables were draped in red and green linens, and centerpieces of holly and ivy sat on every surface. To my left, a long buffet table groaned under the weight of honey-glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, and towering platters of shrimp cocktail. I recognized the spread immediately. It was from the most expensive caterer in the county. The one my mother had told me was too pricey for her budget when she asked me to transfer $3,000 for basic grocery needs last month. Everywhere I looked, I saw my own money being eaten by people who were about to judge me for having it. Hanging above the stage was a massive banner, hand-painted in glittering letters, Ray Appreciation Night, a family restored. It looked less like a party decoration and more like a banner for a revival tent healing service. I took my first step forward, the click of my heels on the hardwood floor cutting through the low hum of conversation. Heads turned. The whisper started at the back of the room and rippled forward like a wave. "She is here. Look at that suit. Is that her? She looks so..." My mother was the first to reach me. She moved with a speed that belied the frail, helpless widow act she had been perfecting for a decade. She was wearing a velvet dress that I had paid for, and her hair was perfectly coiffed. She threw her arms around me, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a restraint than an embrace. "Ray, baby, you made it!" she cried out, her voice pitched loud enough for the back row to hear. She pulled back slightly, her hands gripping my shoulders with bruising force. Tears were already streaming down her face, glistening in the stage lights, to the crowd. She looked like a mother overcome with emotion. But then she leaned in close, her cheek against mine, and the sobbing stopped instantly. "Do not embarrass me tonight," she hissed, her voice a razor blade wrapped in velvet. "Smile, look humble, and when they pass the collection plate for the family fund, you better be the first one to put a check in." She pulled back, beaming, and wiped a tear away. "Oh, look at you. So fancy. You always were the one for high fashion, while we just try to make do." I did not say a word. I just offered a tight, polite nod. Then came Sienna. She was sitting at the front table, surrounded by a court of sympathetic older women. When she saw me, she made a show of struggling to stand up. She placed one hand on the small of her back and the other protectively over her completely flat stomach, exhaling a long, weary breath. "Hey, big sister," Sienna said, waddling over to me. She was wearing a loose, empire waist gown that was clearly designed to hide a bump that did not exist. "I am so glad you came. The baby has been kicking all day. I think he knows his aunt is here." She leaned in for a hug, but I noticed she kept her body angled so that our torsos did not touch. She was terrified I would feel the absence of the pregnancy. "You look tired, Sienna," I said, my voice neutral. "Oh, I am exhausted," she sighed, casting a glance at the watching crowd. "The doctor says the stress is really getting to me. High blood pressure. He says I need total financial stability to ensure the baby makes it to term. But we are praying for a miracle tonight, right?" "Miracles happen," I said, clutching the heavy box in my arms a little tighter. "Sometimes when you least expect them." Troy appeared behind her, clapping a hand on my shoulder. His palms were sweaty. He was wearing a suit that was a size too big, likely bought from a thrift store with the change from his gambling habit. His eyes were darting nervously around the room, but they kept landing on the projector set up in the middle of the aisle. "Ray, good to see you, superstar," Troy said, his voice booming and overly friendly. "We have got a great show for you, a real tribute. You are going to love it. I spent all week working on the visuals." "I bet you did," I said. "I am looking forward to seeing your work, Troy." He blinked, surprised by my lack of hostility, but quickly recovered. "Yeah, well, grab a seat, front row, VIP." I walked to the front, feeling the eyes of 200 people boring into my back. I sat down in the reserved chair, placing the gift box on the floor between my feet. I crossed my legs and folded my hands in my lap, assuming the posture of a calm, attentive observer. The lights dimmed. Pastor Coleman stepped up to the podium. He was a tall man with silver hair and a kind face, the sort of man who truly believed he was doing God's work. I felt a twinge of pity for him. He was just another pawn in my mother's game, convinced he was saving a soul when he was actually facilitating a shakedown. "Brothers and sisters," Pastor Coleman began, his voice warm and resonant, We are gathered here on this holy night, not just to celebrate the birth of our Savior, but to celebrate the potential for rebirth in our own community. We are here to honor a daughter of this church, Ray Collins. There was a polite smattering of applause. I did not move. But we are also here, the pastor continued, his tone dropping to something more somber, to acknowledge pain. The Bible tells us the story of the prodigal son, the child who took his inheritance and left the family to pursue the pleasures of the world, the child who forgot that true wealth is not found in gold or silver, or in fancy city jobs, but in the love of the hearth and home. He looked directly at me. It was not malicious, but it was patronizing. It was a look that said, "Come back to us, you poor, lost, rich girl." "Tonight," he said, "we ask the Lord to soften hearts. We ask for the walls of pride to come down. Let us watch as the family shares their testimony." Troy scrambled to the projector. A beam of light cut through the darkness, hitting the screen behind the pulpit. Piano music began to play. It was a sad, slow, minor key version of "I'll Be Home for Christmas." The first image appeared. It was me at age 7, missing a front tooth, wearing a hand-me-down dress, laughing in the backyard of a house we got evicted from a year later. Then me at 10, helping my mother fold laundry. Then me at 12, holding Sienna when she was a baby. The narrative they were constructing was clear. Look how happy she was when she was poor. Look how much she loved us before she got money. The music faded, and the lights came up on my mother. She stood at the microphone, clutching a tissue. "Ray was such a sweet girl," my mother said, her voice trembling. "She used to say she would take care of me forever. But then, the city called, the job called, and slowly, my little girl disappeared. She sends checks sometimes, yes, but a check cannot hug you. A check cannot hold your hand when you are sick." She looked at me, tears flowing freely now. "I do not want your money. Ray, I just want my daughter back. I want you to stop chasing the world and come home to the people who actually love you." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. "Amen," someone whispered. Then Troy stepped up. He adjusted his tie, looking solemn. "It has been hard on all of us." Troy lied, his voice grave. "I try to be the man of the house, but with the economy, it is tough. And seeing Ray live in that penthouse while her mother struggles, it hurts. But the worst part is, well, I probably shouldn't say this." He paused for effect. He looked at the floor, then up at the crowd. "Last week, Ray told us she thought Mom would be better off in a facility," Troy said. A collective gasp went through the room. "She said it would be cheaper than fixing up the house. A nursing home. For her own mother." My blood ran cold. It was a lie so specific, so calculated to enrage a congregation full of elderly people, that I almost admired the audacity of it. I saw Mrs. Gable, the church organist, glare at me with pure venom. Finally, Sienna waddled up to the mic. She did not need to say much. The image was enough. The pregnant, abandoned sister versus the cold, corporate executive. "I just want my baby to know his aunt," Sienna sobbed. "But the stress, the doctor says the stress Ray causes us is hurting the pregnancy. Every time she threatens to cut us off, my blood pressure spikes. I am scared I'm going to lose the baby because my sister cares more about her bank account than her nephew." The room was silent now, a heavy judgmental silence. The air was thick with disapproval. They hated me. In the span of 10 minutes, my family had successfully turned the entire community into a jury, and I had been found guilty. Pastor Coleman stepped back up. He looked at me with deep sorrow. "Ray," he said softly, "you have heard your family's heart. You have heard their pain. Tonight is a night for redemption. We have prepared a covenant, a simple document where you can pledge your support, not just emotional, but financial, to secure the future of this unborn child and your mother's home. We want to pray over you as you sign it." He gestured to the altar, where a single piece of paper sat on a wooden stand. "Come up, Ray," he urged. "Come home." The room waited. My mother was watching me with eyes that were hard and triumphant. Sienna was smirking behind her tissue. Troy was practically vibrating with victory. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my white jacket. I bent down and picked up the large, silver-wrapped box. I did not walk with my head down. I did not look like the prodigal daughter returning in shame. I walked with the steady, rhythmic cadence of a woman entering a boardroom to announce a merger. The click of my heels echoed in the silence. Click, click, click. I walked past my mother. I walked past Sienna. I walked past Troy. I could smell the arrogance radiating off them. They thought I was bringing the gift to the altar as an offering of surrender. I reached the pulpit. I did not look at the pledge they wanted me to sign. I placed the large box on the stand, covering the paper completely. I turned to face the congregation. 200 faces stared back at me. Angry, pitying, confused. Pastor Coleman held out the microphone. "Share your heart with us, child." I took the microphone. It felt cool and heavy in my hand. I looked at my mother. Her smile faltered slightly. She saw something in my eyes she had not seen before. She saw the reflection of the white suit. She saw the fixer. "I will not be signing anything tonight," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and amplified to every corner of the room. I did not shout. I did not waver. "But the pastor is right about one thing," I continued. "Tonight is a night for the truth. You have heard a story tonight, a story about a poor widow, a struggling sister, and a selfish daughter." I placed my hand on the silver box. "Before I say anything else, I brought a gift. My family asked for a tablet. They asked for money, but I think they deserve something more valuable." I looked at Troy, and for the first time, he looked scared. "This gift," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "is not just for them. It belongs to every single person in this room who has donated $1 to the family fund. It belongs to everyone who has prayed for my soul while their own pockets were being picked." I reached for the small silver bell attached to the ribbon. "I am not here to confess," I said. "I am here to testify." I lifted the bell. Ting! The sound was small, but in the silence of the church, it sounded like the firing pin of a grenade. I turned to the boy running the audiovisual booth, a teenager named Kyle, who I had hired to mow my mother's lawn last summer. "Kyle," I said, "plug it in." And I stepped back to let the world burn. I did not lower the microphone. The silver bell's chime still hung in the air, a piercing note that seemed to sever the emotional strings my mother had been pulling all night. "Kyle," I said, looking up at the audiovisual booth in the balcony. My voice was calm, amplified, and absolute. "There is a USB drive taped to the screen of the tablet inside this box. Please plug it in. The file is ready." My mother froze. Her tear-stained face, which had been contorted into a mask of tragic suffering just seconds ago, suddenly went slack with confusion. She looked at me, then at the box, then back at the congregation. She sensed the shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. She knew me. She knew that I did not do surprises, and I certainly did not do unscripted, heartwarming gestures. "What are you doing, Ray?" she whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Just sign the paper." "I told you, Mom," I said, stepping back from the podium but keeping my hand firmly on the box. "I brought the missing pages of the story. You told them about the daughter who left. I am here to tell them about the family that stayed." I looked at the pastor. He looked bewildered, holding the pledge document like it was a shield. "Open the box, Mom," I commanded. It wasn't a request. My mother's eyes darted to the crowd. She had no choice. If she refused, she looked suspicious. If she opened it, she maintained the illusion of the grateful recipient. She lunged forward, her greedy hands tearing at the silver wrapping paper. I could see the anticipation in Troy's eyes. He thought I had capitulated. He thought there was a check inside, or perhaps the deed to the penthouse he had always fantasized about. The lid came off. There was no gasp of delight. There was only a hollow thud as the lid hit the floor. My mother stared into the box. Her hands shook. She reached in and pulled out not a check, but a stack of thick, cream-colored envelopes. "What is this?" she hissed. "Read the names," I said. She held them up, her hands trembling so violently the paper rattled. "Pastor Coleman, the Board of Elders, the Harrison family, Pastor," I said, gesturing to the envelope on top of the stack. "That one is for you. Please, open it." My mother tried to pull the envelope back, clutching it to her chest. "No, this is private family business. This is inappropriate for church." "The collection plate is church business," I cut in, my voice ice cold. "And since my brother-in-law has been treating this congregation like his personal ATM, I think the investors have a right to see the prospectus." Pastor Coleman stepped forward, his face hardening. He gently but firmly took the envelope from my mother's grip. She was too stunned to fight him. He tore the seal. He pulled out the documents. I saw his eyes scan the first page. The forensic accounting of the family fund, the transfers to the offshore betting sites, the breakdown of the Ponzi scheme. "Troy," the pastor said, his voice breathless. "What is this?" "It is a mistake," Troy shouted, jumping up from his seat. "She forged it. That is a lie. She is jealous of my success." "Kyle," I said into the microphone, "play the video." "No!" Troy screamed. He lunged toward the aisle, trying to scramble up to the balcony, but he was blocked by two large deacons who had sensed the turn of the tide. The screen behind me, which had just been displaying a sepia-toned photo of me looking sad as a teenager, suddenly went black. Then, the audio crackled to life. It was crisp. It was clear. "We hit her with the mismanagement angle. I will say the family fund is drained. The congregation eats that stuff up." Troy's voice, unmistakable, arrogant. The image flickered on. It was the security footage from the hallway. Time-stamped just 4 hours ago. The entire church watched as Troy, Sienna, and my mother plotted the exact performance they had just witnessed. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It sounded like a vacuum seal breaking. The video cut. Now it was the split screen. On the left, Sienna's Instagram Live from earlier that afternoon, where she was weeping about her fragile condition. On the right, the security footage of her eating my gingerbread and laughing. I look tragic but beautiful. It is called distressed chic. I watched the crowd. I saw Mrs. Harrison, the woman who had donated $5,000 for the nursery, stand up. Her hand was over her mouth. Her face was pale. The video cut again. A text message chain appeared on the massive screen, magnified so even the back row could read it. "Troy, the old lady in the third pew. She is ripe. We are going to milk this church crowd dry." "Turn it off!" my mother shrieked. She abandoned the box and ran toward the power strip on the side of the stage. "Kyle, turn it off! She is hacking us! It is deepfake! It is AI!" She reached for the cord, her fingernails clawing at the wall. But she was too late. The video had moved to the final slide. It was the medical record. Patient, Sienna Miller. Date, December 14th. Pregnancy test, negative. And right next to it, the mugshot. Troy Miller, Sarasota Police Department, wanted for securities fraud. The video ended. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. The silence of 200 people realizing they had been played for fools by the people they had trusted, and that they had judged the only person who was actually telling the truth. I looked at my mother. She was standing by the wall, panting, her hair disheveled. She looked at the crowd, searching for a sympathetic face, but she found none. The pity was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard wall of fury. "You lied," Mrs. Harrison said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. "You told me you needed money for a crib. You said the baby was in danger." It was a miscarriage," Sienna stammered, standing up, her hands flailing. "I lost it. Just now. The stress. Ray caused it." "Stop it, Sienna," I said. I did not use the microphone this time. I did not need to. "The insurance record is dated 2 weeks ago. There never was a baby. Sienna collapsed back into her chair, but this time, nobody rushed to comfort her. The circle of older women who had been doting on her scooted their chairs away, creating a physical gap of revulsion. Troy was looking for an exit. He was scanning the side doors, his eyes wild. He took a step toward the fire exit on the left. "I would not go that way, Mr. Miller," a deep voice boomed from the back of the room. We all turned. Agent Vance was standing in the center aisle. He held up a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal the gold shield of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. "Special Agent Vance," he announced. "I need everyone to remain seated. We have probable cause to believe that a felony fraud has been committed on these premises tonight." Troy froze. His face went gray. I looked at the pastor. He was still holding the envelope I had given him. He looked down at the papers, then up at my mother. His eyes were wet, but not with sentimental tears. These were tears of betrayal. "You asked me to pray for her," Pastor Coleman whispered, his voice shaking with righteous anger. "You stood in this holy place, and you asked me to ask God to curse your own daughter, all so you could steal from my flock." "No, Pastor, please," my mother begged, walking toward him, her hands outstretched. "You do not understand. We were desperate. Ray has so much, and she gives us nothing. We just needed a little help." "Help?" I asked. "You have a trust fund. Mom, you have a house that I have paid for. You have had every opportunity." I pointed to the screen where the text messages had been. "That is not desperation," I said. "That is predation." I picked up the last envelope from the box, the one marked Mom. I walked over to her. She flinched as I approached, as if I were going to hit her, but I just held out the envelope. "This is the last thing I will ever give you," I said. She took it, her fingers numb. "Open it," I said. She tore it open. She pulled out the notice of acceleration. What is this?" she stammered. "I bought the debt," I said. "The bank was going to foreclose on you next week because you haven't paid the mortgage in 6 months. You spent the money I sent you on Troy's legal fees in Florida, didn't you?" She did not answer. She didn't have to. "I own the note now," I said, "and I am evicting the tenants who are running a criminal enterprise out of my property." The crowd erupted. It was not applause. It was the sound of chaos. People were standing up, shouting at Troy, demanding their money back. Mrs. Harrison was waving her checkbook in the air. The deacons were moving to block the exits. I stood in the center of the storm, the white suit bright against the dark wood of the sanctuary. I felt incredibly light. The weight I had been carrying for 16 years, the guilt, the obligation, the fear, had vanished. I looked at the silver bell sitting on the podium. I had rung it once to start the truth. I did not need to ring it again to end the lies. The truth was doing a fine job on its own. Agent Vance began to walk down the aisle, handcuffs glinting on his belt. Troy slumped against the wall, defeated. Sienna was sobbing into her hands, but this time, the tears were real. And I just watched. I was the auditor, and the books were finally balanced. The sanctuary, once a place of hushed reverence and golden candlelight, dissolved into a spectacle of kinetic fury. It was as if the invisible strings holding the social fabric of the congregation together had been snapped all at once by the ringing of that silver bell. I stood perfectly still at the foot of the altar, my hands clasped loosely in front of my white suit, watching the collapse of the Collins family empire. It was a demolition I had engineered, yet witnessing the structural failure in real time was breathtaking in its violence. Troy was the first to break. The realization that his carefully constructed facade of the entrepreneurial brother-in-law had been shattered sent him into a feral panic. He did not look at the police officer walking down the aisle. He looked at the source of his exposure. He lunged for the projector sitting on the cart in the center aisle, his eyes wide and manic, screaming that he needed to delete the files. "It is a glitch," Troy howled, his voice cracking. "She hacked the system. Turn it off." He never made it to the cart. Mr. Henderson, the head of the usher board, and a man who had worked in a steel mill for 40 years, stepped out from the second pew. He didn't say a word. He simply extended a thick, heavy arm and clotheslined Troy across the chest. Troy hit the floor with a dull thud that echoed under the high ceilings. Before he could scramble back to his feet, two other deacons, men who had just realized their tithes had been funding Troy's gambling addiction, were on him. They didn't strike him, but they pinned him to the carpet with the heavy, restrained force of men who were holding back a great deal of anger. "Stay down, son," Mr. Henderson rumbled. "You have done enough damage for one night." To my right, the scene was quieter but far more vicious. Sienna was trapped in her chair, not by physical force, but by a wall of judgmental matrons, the women of the church, the grandmothers and mothers who had knitted booties and bought diapers for a baby that never existed, had formed a tight semicircle around her. "I knitted a blanket," Mrs. Gable said, her voice trembling not with age, but with rage. "It took me 3 months. Sienna, my hands ache from the arthritis. And you took it, and you smiled." Sienna shrank back, curling into a ball in the padded church chair. The empire waist dress she wore, designed to accentuate a pregnancy, now just looked like a costume. It was a phantom pregnancy," Sienna sobbed, her eyes darting around for an escape route that didn't exist. "I believed it. I swear. The symptoms were real." "The medical report says you were on birth control pills." "Sienna," I said, my voice cutting through her sobbing without me even raising it. "The pharmacy records are in the envelope with the board." Sienna flinched as if I had slapped her. My mother, realizing that her supporting cast had fallen, turned the full force of her desperation onto me. She abandoned the weeping Sienna and marched toward where I stood, her face contorted into a mask of ugly, venomous hatred. "You did this," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger in my face. "You ungrateful, hateful child. You spent all this time faking records? You hired people to spy on your own family on Christmas?" She turned to the crowd, spreading her arms wide, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Can't you see?" she pleaded, her voice shrill. "She is mentally unstable. She is obsessed with money. She made all of this up because she is jealous that I love Sienna more. It is a sickness." But the crowd did not sway. The evidence had been too visceral. The video of them mocking the holy cows was still burned into everyone's retinas. "Alice, stop it," came a voice from the pulpit. It was Pastor Coleman. He looked 20 years older than he had 10 minutes ago. He was leaning heavily on the wooden lectern, holding the envelope I had given him as if it were a death certificate. "I read the texts, Alice," the pastor said, his voice hollow. "I read how you coached your daughter to cry. I read how you told Troy to target Mrs. Higgins because her memory is failing. You called my flock targets." "It was a joke," my mother cried, but her voice lacked conviction. "Close the collection boxes," the pastor commanded, his voice gaining a sudden, sharp strength. He looked at the ushers standing at the back with the velvet offering bags. "Lock them away. No funds collected tonight will be distributed to the Collins family. Not a single cent." "Now wait a minute," a booming voice interrupted from the third row. "Mr. Harrison stood up. He was the wealthiest man in the congregation, a car dealership owner who had written the $5,000 check for the nursery renovation. Beside him, his wife was wiping mascara from her cheeks, looking at Sienna with pure loathing. "I do not want the funds locked away," Mr. Harrison said, stepping into the aisle. He looked at my mother, then at Troy, who was still pinned to the floor. "I want my money back. I wrote a check for $5,000 last Tuesday. Troy told me it was for a specialized prenatal incubator. I want that check returned, or I am pressing charges for theft by deception alongside whatever the state comes up with." I spent it," Troy groaned from the floor. "I had a sure thing on the ponies. I was going to pay it back double." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Agent Vance finally reached the front of the sanctuary. He moved with the weary efficiency of a man who had seen too many con artists ruin too many holidays. He reached down and hauled Troy to his feet. The handcuffs clicked. A sharp, metallic sound that finalized the end of Troy's career as a financier. "Troy Miller," Vance said, his voice carrying easily. "I am detaining you on an outstanding warrant from the state of Florida for securities fraud, and I am adding fresh charges for wire fraud and larceny here in Tennessee based on the evidence provided by Ms. Collins's team." "Team?" my mother whispered, looking around wildly. "What team?" From the back of the room, near the sound booth, a man in a dark trench coat stepped forward. It was Nico. I hadn't seen him enter, but I knew he would be there. He held up his phone, which was connected to the church's Bluetooth audio system. "I have one more thing," Nico announced. His voice was gravelly and calm. "This is a voice memo recovered from Troy's cloud account, recorded 3 days ago in your kitchen, Mrs. Collins." Nico tapped the screen. My mother's voice filled the church. It was crystal clear. "If we can just get them crying during Silent Night, they will empty their pockets. These people are so desperate to feel like saints. They will pay for anything. Just make sure Ray looks like the villain. If we destroy her reputation, she will have to pay us to make it stop." My mother went pale. The blood drained from her face so completely she looked like a wax figure. She swayed, grabbing the edge of a pew to steady herself. The audio clip was the final nail in the coffin. There was no spinning this. There was no out of context. It was a confession of malice aforethought. Sienna, hearing the recording, finally snapped. The pressure of the room, the hatred of the women surrounding her, and the handcuffs on her husband were too much. She let out a wail that was, for the first time in her life, entirely genuine. "She made me do it!" Sienna screamed, pointing a shaking finger at our mother. "I didn't want to wear the pillow. I told her it was too risky. She said we needed the money for the mortgage. She said Ray owed us." "Shut up, Sienna," my mother hissed, lunging toward her. "No!" Sienna scrambled back, knocking over a chair. "Troy wanted to leave town, but Mom said we could milk the church for one more Christmas. She planned the whole thing. She wrote the script." The family was cannibalizing itself. The united front they had presented to the world for decades, the poor, struggling, loving victims, was tearing apart at the seams, revealing the rot underneath. I stood in the center of the madness, untouchable. I felt like a ghost in my own life, observing a tragedy I had written but was no longer participating in. I saw the faces of the congregation, people who had looked at me with disdain 20 minutes ago, now looking at me with a mixture of awe and apology. Mrs. Harrison caught my eye and mouthed the word sorry. I didn't respond. I didn't need their apologies. I just needed them to see. My mother, realizing she had lost Troy, lost Sienna, and lost the crowd, played her final card. She turned back to me. She did not scream this time. She crumbled. She let her knees give way, sinking to the floor in a pile of velvet and tears. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my white trousers, her grip desperate and claw-like. "Ray, please," she sobbed, looking up at me with wet, pleading eyes. "Baby, please, make it stop. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I am your mother. I gave you life. You cannot let them take me away. You cannot let them take the house." She tugged at my leg, trying to pull me down to her level. "Fix it, Ray. You always fix it. Just write a check. Pay Mr. Harrison back. Tell the policeman it was a family dispute. Please, do it for Mommy." The room went silent again, waiting to see if the conditioning would hold, waiting to see if the daughter would break. I looked down at her. I saw the woman who had guilted me into working 3 jobs. I saw the woman who had stolen my credit. I saw the woman who had planned to humiliate me on the one night of the year that was supposed to be about love. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, quiet sense of completion. I reached down, not to help her up, but to peel her fingers off my suit. I did it gently, one finger at a time, removing her grip from my life. I took a step back, creating a distance that was only 2 feet physically, but 1,000,000 miles emotionally. "I am fixing it, Mom," I said softly. "No, you are ruining us," she cried. "I am not ruining you," I said, my voice steady and final. "I am stopping you. I am stopping you from stealing from these people. I am stopping you from using Sienna. And I am stopping you from bleeding me dry." I looked at Agent Vance, then at the pastor. "The evidence is all there," I said. "My part in this is done." My mother stared at me, her mouth open, realizing for the first time that the Bank of Ray was not just closed, it had been demolished. "You are heartless," she whispered. "No," I said, turning away from her to face the exit. "I just finally started using my head." The chaos in the sanctuary did not last forever. Like a thunderstorm that breaks violently and then suddenly dissipates, the shouting and the movement slowly drained away, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than the noise had been. Agent Vance had moved Troy to a chair in the back corner, where he sat slumped and defeated, the handcuffs glinting under the church lights. Sienna had stopped screaming and was now just weeping softly, a huddled mass of chiffon and regret. My mother sat on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her reputation, staring at the hem of my white trousers. The congregation instinctively stepped back. They pushed the tables aside, clearing a wide circle in the center of the room, leaving me and my family isolated in a ring of judgment and revelation. It felt less like a church service now and more like a courtroom where the verdict had already been read. I reached for the microphone one last time. I did not need to tap it to get their attention. Every eye in the room was fixed on me. "Today," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space, "I am not asking for forgiveness, and I am not asking for pity. For 32 years, I let this family tell a story about me. They told you I was cold. They told you I was selfish. They told you I abandoned them. Today, I am simply finishing the story they forgot to write." I looked down at my mother. She looked small now. The looming, terrifying figure of my childhood had shrunk into a bitter, frightened woman. "For 16 years, I continued, addressing the room but looking only at her. "I have paid every utility bill for that house on Maple Street. I paid for the car Sienna crashed. I paid for the knee surgery my mother needed 3 years ago. I paid off the credit cards Troy maxed out in my name before I knew to lock my credit. I have spent over $200,000 trying to buy the love of people who only saw me as a bank account." A gasp rippled through the room. $200,000. In a town like Harborview, that was a fortune. It was a life. "I do not say this to brag," I said, keeping my tone even. "I say it to balance the ledger, because as of tonight, the bank is closed." I turned to the stack of documents resting on the podium. I picked up the final envelope, the one I had handed to my mother, which she had dropped in her shock. I pulled out the deed. "Mom," I said. She looked up, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. "You told everyone tonight that I wanted to put you in a home," I said. "You told them I wanted to sell the house out from under you. The truth is, the bank was going to take it on the 1st of January. You stopped paying the mortgage 8 months ago. You took the money I sent you for the house, and you gave it to Troy for his investments." She flinched. She knew I knew, but hearing it spoken aloud stripped away her last layer of denial. "I bought the note," I said, holding up the paper. "I paid the arrears. I own the mortgage now. I own the house." I turned to Sienna. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. For the first time in years, I didn't see the bratty sister. I saw a terrified girl who had been manipulated by the same woman who raised me. "Sienna," I said, "you have a choice to make, right now, tonight." She wiped her nose, listening. "If you cooperate with Agent Vance," I said, "if you tell him everything about Troy's scheme, and if you apologize to Mrs. Harrison and every other person in this room you lied to, I will not add my name to the lawsuit against you. I will not sue you for the money you stole from me." Sienna looked at Troy, then at our mother, and finally at me. She nodded, a jerky, desperate movement. "I will," she whispered. "I am sorry, Ray. I am so sorry." I nodded. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. I turned to the congregation. I saw Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Henderson, the choir members, the Sunday school teachers. "I want to thank you," I said. "Many of you fed us when I was a child. You looked out for me. And I want to apologize. I stayed away because I was ashamed. I let my silence protect their lies. And because of that, some of you were hurt. I am sorry that it took this long for the truth to come home." Mrs. Harrison stepped forward. She looked at me with a profound sadness, but she nodded. "Thank you, Ray," she said softly. I looked back at my mother. She was struggling to her feet, using the pew for support. She smoothed her velvet dress, trying to summon one last shred of dignity, one last weapon from her arsenal of guilt. "You think you are so special," my mother spat, her voice shaking with a mix of rage and grief. "You think money makes you better than us? You owe me, Ray. I carried you. I went through labor for you. I gave you life. You are nothing without me." It was the ultimate trump card, the card she had played every time I wanted to leave, every time I wanted to say no. "I gave you life." I looked her in the eye, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. The hook did not catch. The guilt did not land. "You gave me biology." "Mom," I said, "you gave me birth, but I built my life. I built it in spite of you, not because of you." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out one last, thin envelope. "This is for you," I said, holding it out. She stared at it suspiciously. "What is it? An eviction notice?" "It is a lease agreement," I said. "You can stay in the house. I will not put you on the street. But you will pay rent. It is a nominal amount, but you will pay it. And inside that envelope is the business card for a financial counselor and a therapist. You will attend weekly sessions with both, if you miss a payment or if you miss a session. The eviction notice comes next." I placed the envelope in her hand. She took it, looking at me as if I were a stranger. And in a way, I was. The daughter she could manipulate was dead. "There are no more joint accounts," I said, my voice final. "There is no more cash in envelopes. There are no more secrets. If you want a relationship with me, it starts at 0. Tonight." I did not wait for her answer. There was nothing else to say. I placed the microphone back on the stand. The thud was the period at the end of the sentence I had been writing all night. I turned and walked down the center aisle. The congregation parted for me, creating a wide path. I did not look down. I did not look back at the altar where my family stood in ruins. I looked straight ahead at the double doors leading out into the night. The sound of my heels on the hardwood was the only sound in the room. Click, click, click. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the cold, crisp air. The wind hit my face, drying the few tears I hadn't realized I had shed. From high above in the bell tower, a sound rang out. Bong. It was midnight. Bong. Christmas morning had arrived. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my feet. I looked up at the sky. It was clear and full of stars, vast and indifferent and beautiful. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that felt cleaner than it had in years. I had come here thinking I was bringing a gift of vengeance. I thought the box contained their punishment, but as I opened my car door and looked back at the warm glow of the church windows, I realized I was wrong. I had delivered the truth, yes, but the gift wasn't for them. The gift was for me. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. I checked my rearview mirror one last time, then put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the ghost of Ray Collins behind me in the rearview mirror. I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I really want to connect with all of you. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.